early in projects and programs when, strategies are being defined, because it's a different type of people that you're typically working with.
Mm-hmm. I have project managers that approach me and say, well, I would love to be a part of that strategic conversation, but I'm not allowed to. I'm not brought in at that point. And it goes back to what we were saying earlier about making sure you're crafting your messages correctly and strategically, because if you are looked at or your department is looked at as this is what you do and this is all you do and this is the only service you provide, and you're not educating those other departments or those other people on what you actually can provide and what you want to provide, you're not going to ever get there. They're never going to show up at your door and say, "Hey, can you guys add some strategy to this?" That's
right.
That's not how business works, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I obviously work in the advertising space today in the automotive industry, and these are long-term projects that we work on around supporting the advertising and marketing for new vehicles. And so there's a lot of early strategy and planning work, and the way that I myself have started to get myself into those conversations, the way I've been helping other team members get ourselves into those conversations is not be not be that stereotype of a project manager who is just holding those people to a timeline and tracking the meeting minutes and delivering tasks, but doing everything you can to in navigating some definitely political waters, making sure that the people in those conversations are still being held accountable to timelines and deliverables, but with you having that filter on that, hey, the decisions that these people are working to make are some of the most these decisions will have impact on the projects and the program teams and the budgets for 18 to 24 months to come. So just like you support your people in the production phases of projects, you work to protect and support and communicate on behalf of the people who are in the strategic and planning phases of your projects. So another way to look at it is, hey, let the people who are in the productions phases who will be coming up in the production phases of the program, and they'll be doing their hard work then, keep them aware of what's going on in the strategic phases of the project or program, so those production people are not surprised by it. I've seen some of the most challenging projects. Well, definitely the most challenging projects happen when the people who are responsible for building whatever it is are surprised by the short amount of time they have to build it. They're surprised by the business objectives. They're surprised by the goals. So that's another thing that a project manager can do to let themselves be seen as a strategic thinker in the execution of a project or a program, bridge the gap between the strategic thinkers and the production people.
If you're heading towards a tight deadline or a lot of work in a short amount of time, and your team is disenfranchised, you're not going to get every best hour they have. There's going to be some angst within that team. Yeah.
And then again, going back to that point that I think we both vehemently agree with. Hey, if it's bring those production people, and I don't even necessarily like that term, but I can't think of another one right now.
Sure.
Bring those production people into a conversation, with the strategic thinkers and say, hey, guys, let's get started on this. Let's get started on this. Don't make the line so black and white. So, and again, I think you can get around some of those, old-fashioned, walls and barriers by doing some of the things that we were talking about earlier, discovery workshopping, road mapping, planning, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But why I like to sort of hammer on this point, because, I still see it happen. hear it happening when I'm talking to, my colleagues and peers across the industry.
It really comes down to culture in a big sense. And I think a project manager, at least a very good one, or a product manager, can have a very positive impact on the culture and be bringing people together, because there's definitely been times where I've walked into situations where the culture hasn't been so great and the departments are super siloed, and you might invite the lead developer and a lead QA person or something to a meeting, and they might sit there and say, why am I here? I have a project I should be working on. Right. And, that's really when that coaching needs to come into play, where you're explaining to them how they're going to help save their future selves a lot of heartache by participating in this discovery workshop now, right?
You make a great point that you've got to sell these methods both ways.
Yeah.
You've got to sell these methods to, the people who have, hard, development timelines that need to be hit, but then you've got to sell these methods to, the people who have, generally been, sort of insular strategic thinkers who have never really thought about, what it takes to actually, build what they're thinking of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a lot of times these groups haven't even been asked to participate in those things. They've just been given a set of instructions and said, go build this Lego set. Let me know when it's done. And, now that we've got more and more places moving towards Agile, a lot of this old guard is starting to be broken down, which I really like. But again, for people that have been doing this for a long time, it's still a big change, not just for the clients and for the executive team, but for those developers and those QA engineers and anybody else in between on those teams that they haven't worked like this before.
Oh, absolutely. I've seen, uncomfortable situations where people are like, I have a voice in front of the customer, that type of thing. So that's where that role of encouragement and support and sort of helping everyone, let down that guard a little bit. Yeah. And then, the other thing that I just talking about that point of what project managers can do to become, more strategic is, think about your interactions with the client. Think about trying to put yourself in their shoes, and understand the, the deadlines and turmoil that they're under. And don't only just try and be the voice of your team, but try and, empathize with your client's position. And first of all, they will have a lot more respect for you. Then also you can, get your teams to understand, their perspective, mm-hmm. which a lot of times if you have an understanding of what the client's perspective is, a true understanding of it, their requests sometimes don't sound as unreasonable.
So to your point, I've had project managers come to me and say, well, I brought the team in and they just sit there and they don't say anything. And then after they leave, they're like, oh, this is going to be really bad. And you're like, what? Why didn't you say something during the conversation? And here's what I've coached people on is a pregame will always save your life. If I and the account person have had a number of conversations with the sponsor or the client or the stakeholder or whatever nomenclature you want to use for the person who is on the hook for a successful delivery. If you sit down with the team and explain, these are the conversations we have, this is what our hopes are is to get out of this conversation. This is your role in that conversation. These are some of the things that I want to talk about during this. And I want you to feel free to speak up in here and here and here in these directions. All right, let's go. We're going to go meet with the client. But there's many times where people just dump people in and say, well, what? I added you. Yeah. I added you to the meeting invite. Isn't that good enough for you? Like,
absolutely. That's a great point. Sort of, pregame stuff. But even before that point, I mean, it gets to this idea of, really fundamentally changing the interactions of all the project team members and thinking about your stakeholders or your clients as project team members as well. Right. Yep. I mean, you want them, you want their voice in the mix. Obviously it's got to be managed, It's got to be handled appropriately. But you want the people who are actually doing the work, to understand the customer's perspective, and vice versa. You want the customer to understand the perspective of the people who are actually doing the work. So those, sort of that modernization of the way we are all trying to execute our projects now has, made that role of, the project manager, I like to say, trying to position yourself as the center of a project. It's brought up a whole new requirement of skill sets around, breaking down barriers, letting people talk who generally haven't spoken before with one another, opening new lines of communication, and bringing a sort of a new level of transparency to the projects that we work on.
Ned, if people want to find out more about what you're doing and where you're working, and maybe reach out to contact you with any questions or things like that, I know that you contribute articles and you do some speaking on occasion. Where's a good place for people to find out more and follow what you're doing?
Yep. You can find my Twitter handle, which is NedJohn, NEDJOHN. And then I always like communicating on LinkedIn too. So linkedin.com/NedJohn, NEDJOHN.
Very cool. Well, Ned, I want to thank you so much for taking the time today. It was a fantastic conversation. I love talking about setting great expectations, not only with clients, but with team members as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kurt.
Yeah, no, thank you. And there's my talk with Ned. So just a reminder, you can come and see me speak on April 18th at the Product Development Managers Association event. That's at Padilla in downtown Minneapolis. You can get tickets at schmidt-list.com, or you can check out pdma.org. And don't forget, check out what we're doing over at Foundry at foundrymakes.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.